Welcome back to the free CompTIA Plus training series, and we are going to continue along with our engagement management chapter, and section 1.3 of engagement management falls under the testing frameworks and methodologies. And in this particular video, we're going to be talking about the various methodologies and frameworks that would guide a penetration test. And there are a lot of really good ones. There are a lot of very popular ones that are used regularly, and believe it or not, actual malicious actors also use these frameworks to try to navigate their own paths along with their attacks towards your devices or your network. And we can use this as white hat hackers and legitimate ethical hackers, penetration testers, to also do the same thing. So testing frameworks standardize the penetration testing procedures and ensuring consistency, repeatability, and compliance with legal, regulatory, and ethical guidelines. And again, there's just going to be some really famous ones, popular ones. There's several of them that I'm going to share with you that I've created multiple videos for each one of them that are already on this channel, simply because of the fact that they are used in so many different types of exercises, including pen tests. And threat emulation is another really big one that's kind of like a part of the purple teaming concept, where you have blue team and red team coming together and they collaborate and they combine their forces to do this threat emulation exercise, which is very similar to a penetration test. But what you're also doing at the same time is you would also be involved in looking at all of the defense systems and all of the security tools to see how those threats that you're emulating are going to impact your network, and then you make your moves and your adjustments that way. You're not doing it just from the offensive side where you're just running the exercise and then the security team or the defensive team, the blue team, is in their own room or in their own department handling it and trying to respond to it. When you're doing threat emulation, you're doing both things. That's why it's called purple teaming. So anyways, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. This is the testing frameworks and methodologies section. To get the PenTest Plus notes, practice questions, and to join a supportive community of like-minded people like you, consider joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, the agent, the guardian, and the master. And each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels will get exclusive content like line-by-line code explanations for how to create cybersecurity and PenTest Plus scripts, like exclusive downloads that they will get. For example, the notes document for this PenTest Plus and everything that I'm using for the lectures, as well as all of the practice questions and everything else that will go along that will be made for the scripts and everything else that we're going to be doing for the PenTest Plus training series. There will be free pre-made monthly Python automations that have to do with system administration, cybersecurity, defense, as well as, of course, PenTest Plus and ethical hacking. And then there's going to be monthly live streams with me every single month, plus so many other things that you would get as a part of being a member of Hackaholics Anonymous in these tiers. To join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@hankhackshackers/join, and you'll be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous. Now, without further ado, let us continue with PenTest Plus. These are some of the methodologies and frameworks and threat modeling techniques that we're going to be talking about. It's actually perfect timing for this one. I literally just finished the threat emulation section for SOC Level 2. So all of that is actually in the SOC Level 2 playlist. So if you're curious about that, by the time that the next episode for the PenTest Plus training series actually comes out, if you're curious about these threat modeling and threat emulation exercises, you can definitely go and check out the recent videos from SOC Level 2 to just kind of see how we use these various frameworks. For example, the MITRE attack framework, how we use the MITRE attack framework and things like Atomic Red Team or Caldera to actually create these threat emulations and these threat modeling exercises. But we have the industry recognized pen test frameworks, which is the OSSTMM. I'll show you what that means. The CREST, PTES or PTES, and then we have MITRE attack, and then we have web and mobile security standards. OWASP top 10 is the most popular. It's very commonly used in a lot of different companies, if not every single company that has some kind of a web application. They always reference the OWASP top 10 list. And then we have the MASVS or MASVS. I don't think that's how you pronounce that, but if you wanted to, you could. So that would be MASVS. And then we have Industrial Control System Security, which is a really, really big deal as well. Purdue Model. So this has anything to do with, you know, the power plants and manufacturing warehouses and any kind of grid or literally any kind of massive industrial building that does a lot of really cool things with these giant devices that are connected to a network that are controlled remotely. They have these industrial control systems, and so you want to be able to use some kind of a framework to pen test against those systems. And then of course there's threat modeling frameworks like the Dread, Stride, and Octave, or I want to say it's Octave. There's also something called Pasta that is also used in the same breath that these are used. And again, there's another video on that's inside of the SOC Level 2 playlist. So if you actually want to go check those out, there's a lot of different threat modeling frameworks that exist. And the biggest one that I think is referenced very regularly is MITRE ATT&CK, because it is a database of real live attacks that have actually taken place against countries, against various organizations, and every single one of those steps is outlined inside of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. And then you can even use their attack navigator to use like a step-by-step map of, okay, this is how you get in, and this is what you do to escalate privileges, and this is what you do to take action on your objectives. And all of those things are outlined for you depending on the profile of the adversary that you choose. And you say, okay, I want to be, you know, this advanced persistent threat group, and I want to use all of the tactics that they used because they also attacked financial companies, and I work for a financial company. So I want to see what tactics and techniques that they use to attack finances, and we're going to emulate all of those for our penetration test. So there's a lot of really, really useful stuff inside of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. And of course, OWASP top 10 and all these things. These are more like models that serve as kind of like checklists or guidelines. They don't really give you the breakdown of what you can do and what you should do the way that MITRE ATT&CK does. But we're going to be talking about all of these things anyway, so you'll get a really good idea of how they work. And as we go further into the actual application of these theories, because we're technically talking about pre-engagement and engagement management and really everything that builds up to the practical stuff. Once we actually get into the practical stuff, you'll see how we end up using a lot of these things to do our penetration tests. So here's the first one. The first one is the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual. It's a very big mouthful. So we have OSSTMM, the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual. This was developed by the Institute for Security and Open Methodologies, also known as ISACOM or ISCOM, if you want to pronounce it that way. And it's a structured approach to security assessments across multiple domains. So, for example, the networks or the wireless devices, or human security, which kind of goes into social engineering and physical penetration testing, because technically human beings are a part of the physical world. So it looks at a lot of these different domains, these different areas of security. And when you're looking at wireless devices or wireless networks or wired networks or just networks in general, and the various elements of what a domain could actually be, there are just so many different subcategories that we can call that fall into these different worlds, these different domains. And this is one of those open source methodology manuals that can be used to emulate threats or to use as a guideline or a framework for the penetration test that you would want to run. The key focus areas are the operational security, so OPSEC, which measures real-world risk exposure. Then there's the attack surface mapping, which identifies points of entry and weaknesses. And then there are the 5 security testing channels. So there's the human channel, which falls under social engineering. There's the physical channel, which would be doors, badges, biometrics, cameras, gates, security guards, all of those things. And technically, I guess security guards would fall under humans because technically they are humans. Wireless would be, so of course, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Data networks are the TCP/IP, the domain name systems, the firewall, rules, all of those fall under data. And then we have telecommunications, which would be voice over IP, satellites, mobile networks. And these would be the 5 security testing channels that would be for the open source model manual that we have. So this would just be kind of, again, the way that they would break down. I would say these would be considered the domains that we referenced just in the previous slide that we just looked at. So why does it matter? Why does OSSTMM actually matter? This is going to be a question that we're going to ask about every single one of the frameworks. And the reason for this one is that it's a scientific approach to penetration testing. It helps businesses measure operational security, which is OPSEC, over time, meaning over an expanded period, not just in one little moment or a couple of days. And it focuses on attack vectors beyond traditional IT infrastructure. So it focuses on physical security, it focuses on social engineering, and it's the scientific approach to make that happen. So the traditional IT infrastructure is typically referred to as, okay, so we have the network, and then we have the computers inside of the network or the devices inside of the network, and how do we get into the network from the outside, or how do we get into the building and then attach something to get into the network. So it's mostly focused about the IT infrastructure. And then when we look at OSSTMM, we're looking at the social engineering, which is the human element. We're looking at physical security, and we're looking at pretty much everything else that really encompasses the big picture of security. The next one that we have would be the Council of Registered Ethical Security Testers, also known as CREST. This is a much better acronym. I really honestly wonder, I'm like, did they come up with this part of the name first, or did they say, okay, this is going to be our acronym, and then, well, what does it fit? You know what I mean? So what is CREST? It's an international accreditation. Oh my God, accreditation. Wow. International accreditation body for penetration testers. Wow, this is a hard word for me. I don't know why. CREST certifies cybersecurity professionals and pen testing firms to ensure ethical and competent testing. So this is an international body for pen testers, and this is a big one. Anytime that you hear the word council inside of a name for something, it sounds like very Harry Potterish. It sounds like it's like a very epic thing. And it's international. It's an international body for penetration testers. The key features of CREST methodology are that it's standardized testing procedures. It ensures consistent and repeatable penetration testing. There's legal and ethical considerations that follow strict ethical guidelines, and it's comprehensive reporting standards, including technical risk analysis and remediation guidance. So these are the key features of the CREST methodology. Why does CREST matter? It's recognized by governments and financial institutions. So pretty much the biggest entities across the world internationally that have most likely the highest type of regulations. Government regulations, obviously, if you're a government agency or if you're dealing with a government agency, you have to abide by a lot of different regulations because you're literally dealing with a state or a country, and it's a very, very big deal to abide by all of those standards. And of course, financial institutions, they deal with money. A lot of banks are international banks, Citi and Chase and JP Morgan, all of these different entities are not just local to one country. They run globally and they have clients all over the world. So these are the most likely the highest regulated industries that you would probably have to deal with if you actually go into either of these worlds. And so CREST would be a really big element. It would play a big part in doing pen testing for these types of institutions. And there's a requirement for working with regulated industries. So for example, banking, which would say, let's say Sarbanes-Oxley would want to be the one of the compliance requirements. Healthcare would be HIPAA. Government would be FISMA. There's so many different types of regulations that these types of entities would have to abide by, and compliance, and a lot of standards that they would have to abide by. And CREST is where that kind of comes in. That's the organization that comes in, the council that comes in to make sure that when you run your penetration test for any of these types of organizations, that you follow exactly the guidelines that you need to be following. Our next one is going to be the Penetration Testing Execution Standard, PTES. This is a widely adopted pen testing methodology, and it defines a structured approach to penetration testing. There are 7 phases of PTES. So we have the first being the pre-engagement interaction, so defining the scope, the rules of the engagement, legal agreements, which is very familiar and very similar to a lot of the things that we talked about already. Intelligence gathering, and this would be also known as reconnaissance. So open source intelligence using a tool like Shodan or Maltego or ReconNG, and we're going to be using those tools. And then once you have all of your intel and you've done your recon, you would start doing doing some threat modeling based on the information that you've gathered. So you would identify the potential attack paths. So let's say you would use the MITRE attack matrix to try to see what various potential attack paths exist for you and for the various softwares that you've discovered through your intel. Then we have vulnerability analysis, so scanning with Nessus or OpenVAS or Nikto or a variety of other tools that are also vulnerability analysis tools. Nmap has vulnerability analysis scripts that are pre-embedded into it. So you would run your vulnerability analysis to see what vulnerabilities exist, and then you would start exploiting those vulnerabilities. So you would either use Metasploit or Mimikatz or password cracking or social engineering, or depending on what you're allowed to do, right? Depending on the parameters or the rules of the engagement for that penetration test, you would use a variety of different tools to create your exploits to go on the official attack and try to get into the infrastructure or the system. And once you've done that, you would do your post-exploitation activity, meaning maintaining some kind of persistence, creating a scheduled task maybe, or creating your own usernames and having access to them via a C2 command and control server externally. There are so many different ways that you can do persistence. And then there's lateral movements, meaning you get in from one, and I'll kind of show you a little screenshot in a little bit about a lateral movement attempt as well. And so just based on, you got one user, you came in as a low privilege user and you move around and you got another user and another user, and then you keep doing that until you try to escalate your privileges and maybe get to a point where you can exfiltrate data or whatever your action is that you would take on your objectives. That would all happen inside of the post-exploitation. And then all of the steps that you've done over here, pretty much, let's say from 2 to 6 is where really the actual exercise is taking place. All of that should be inside of your reporting, meaning you would document everything from the very beginning. This is, I used Shodan and I found this, and I used Maltego and I found this, and then I created this threat model. We found these vulnerabilities, we exploited them using Metasploit, and then this is what we did when we actually got into the system and we were able to create new users, etc., etc. And all of that would be inside of the reporting, because that's going to be used for the final meeting with the stakeholders and C executives and etc. To actually document, to report on what you found. The reason why p-test matters is that it's comprehensive, it covers every phase of penetration testing, and it provides clear guidance on tools, techniques, and best practices. So this is another one of those tools that can apply to a large variety of different types of pen tests. And then depending on what you're doing, you would even have tools and breakdowns of techniques and everything that you would need to execute on your penetration test. The next one is my personal favorite, which is the MITRE Attack Framework, a globally recognized threat intelligence knowledge base. It maps real-world adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures. And the structure is that you have the tactic. So for example, initial access would be one of the tactics, or privilege escalation. I'll show you, we'll just log into the website real quick and I'll show you what it looks like. But you have the tactics, and underneath the tactics, so the tactic itself would be the high level adversary goal. And underneath each tactic, there would be a list of techniques, which would be the specific attack techniques that you would use. For example, credential dumping or DLL injection, etc. And then inside some of these techniques, there are sub-techniques, which are the granular attack methods. So there would be a variety of different ways to dump credentials, for example. And then you would have the procedures, which are literal step-by-step actions that have been taken by previous adversaries to, exploit or attack a specific country or an organization or anything like that. So MITRE attack is really powerful. And now, again, I'll show you like real quick. We'll go through the website right now just so you can kind of see what it looks like if you've never seen it before. But I have several videos on MITRE attack on this channel that you can just go ahead and just go to the homepage of the channel, search for MITRE attack or just MITRE, and then you'll see a lot of videos pop up, and then you'll get a lot of cool demonstrations and examples that we've done, especially even as recently as the SOC Level 2 playlist, where we went through the threat emulation and threat modeling exercises, and we were using the MITRE attack framework and the IDs for the tactics and the techniques to use, Atomic Red Team or Caldera to actually emulate and execute our attacks. The reason why MITRE attack matters is that it's used by both red teams and blue teams, and a combination of the two, which would end up being a purple team. To simulate advanced adversaries is what red teams would do. To map security controls to real-world attack behaviors is what blue teams would do. And purple teams would be the combination of these two, where they emulate and simulate adversary attacks, and then they would look at all of their security controls to see how those attacks are actually impacting their systems. And just to give you a quick snapshot, this is what it looks like when you actually go to attack.mitre.org, and inside, as soon as you land on the home page, you will be presented with the attack matrix. The attack matrix has all of these tactics that you see at the top right here. So the top of each one of these columns has an attack, right, or a tactic. So under reconnaissance, we have active scanning, which would end up being the technique. And then if it has this little gray thing next to it, that means that it can actually break open, and then you will have sub techniques inside of this one. And then when you hover over each one of them, you see that there is this T1595001. That's the ID for scanning IP blocks that you can actually use with a tool like Atomic Red Team to actually emulate your attacks. And then so for the most part, a lot of them have these little gray boxes that will expand into other sub techniques, but then you have certain ones where it's just acquire access, and that's pretty much it. That's the only technique that's available under that tactic, and search victim owned websites, etc. So there's a lot of different tactics that are led by these, that at the top of these columns, and then inside of them there are a bunch of techniques and sub techniques. So for example, defense evasion has 44 techniques listed under it, and it's a very robust specific section. So you can look at them individually based on the tactics and the techniques and the sub techniques, or you can go into the CTI portion right here for cyber threat intelligence, click on groups, and then when you go into groups, you get a list of all of the malicious actors, all of the adversary groups that exist. And we have, for example, Akira, which is a really famous one. Akira is a ransomware variant and ransomware deployment entity active since March of 2023, and it's used to compromise credentials, etc., etc. It gives you like the full description of this thing. Oops, I accidentally clicked on that. And then so under Akira, we'll have the associated group descriptions. Then we'll have the techniques that they used, and then the software that they used, and any other references that are external that go outside of the MITRE attack framework. But there's one specific thing that I really want to point out, which is the attack navigator right here. When we click on attack navigator, we actually get to either download their attack navigation, or we can just click on view, which will open it inside of a new tab, and then you get to see every step that Akira took. So we see it right here, right? So Akira is right here, and this will be the attack navigator for Akira. So under initial access, they did remote services, and then they did valid accounts, and we can expand that to see what they did. And then I guess it doesn't say which one they specifically used, but they definitely used valid accounts, and they definitely used external remote services to attain initial access. And then they used external remote services and valid accounts again for persistence. They show up under multiple categories, as you can see. And then if we go, we can see valid accounts over here as well under privilege escalation. So they use valid accounts to get initial access, to get persistence, and to escalate their privileges. And then anything under defense evasion, we also have valid accounts under defense evasion, because if it's a valid account, then it doesn't get red flagged by any of the defense tools. And then under this discovery, we can see that they use domain trust discovery, and then they use remote system discovery, and that's pretty much it. So basically what you can see is that the group, whatever the group is that you used, they used a series of attacks to get to their final step, which is the last exfiltration is what they wanted to do. So they exfiltrated to cloud storage, and they stole data that way. And then the impact was to get account access removal, data encrypted for impact, financial theft, and all of the things that they were able to actually do as an impact against their target. And if we click on any of these things or hover over any of them, we can see that, Akira, under the comments, if I move my mouse, the comment will go away, but you can see under the comments that it actually has the link directly to the various elements that they use. So let's see if we can actually expand on this so I can kind of show you what's available for it. So let me see here if I can open this up. It doesn't seem to allow me to open it up, unfortunately, so I'm very sorry about that. Let's see if we can expand the valid accounts. Let's go to domain accounts if I can open that. I can't. So it basically just shows you what it is that they did. And if you wanted to get more details, if you click on any of these things in the top right here, we actually have selection controls, layer controls, and technique controls. And then we can look at the comments that were associated with it. So under technique controls, you can actually look at the comment for the one that you've selected, and it says Akira, etc., etc. And then you can just look at each one of these individual links that will point to the various extensions or the various external sources or other sources inside of MITRE ATT&CK. So if I actually go into, let's say, Notepad that is available, an online Notepad, I can go ahead and paste everything that I got from that comment so I can see what was inside of it. So I can see that there's multiple links right here. So Akira, the MITRE group, which is that, uses built-in NL test, which is this thing right here, software right here. So we can go ahead and highlight that piece, and then we can go directly to that to try to see what they used NL test for. And then that way we'll get more information about what Akira specifically did, and then we can learn more about the various references for NL test. And then of course, once you know what the name of it is, and it's a Windows command line utility used to list domain controllers, etc., etc., you get so much more information out of it. I realize that I'm going into much deeper details for MITRE ATT&CK, but it's because of the fact that I really love this this resource so much that I just wanted to kind of go off on a nerd. I was nerding out a little bit. I was geeking out a little bit just to kind of show it to you. So that is what MITRE ATT&CK is, and that's why MITRE ATT&CK matters. All right, now we can go into web and mobile security standards. And the very first one, the most important one in my opinion, is the OWASP Top 10 for web security, web application security. And it's a list of the top 10 most critical security risks for web applications, and it's created by the Open Web Application Security Project, and it's updated every 3 to 4 years. So the version that I'm going to show you, technically it's been dated 2023, but I think it's the most recent that was available, which is 2021's version. So we'll compare it to the actual OWASP Top 10 website, and you can always just Google OWASP Top 10 and you'll be able to see the most recent version. I do note that there is something that's supposed to be released in 2025 because there are some of these tactics and techniques that have kind of switched spots, and they usually kind of either lose their place in the top 10 list by like going down or by going up, or there's like a brand new technique that's been added because it was not previously even available in the last version of the list. And ever since that version of the list, the hackers were very, very clever, and they added a new technique that's now like a really big deal that we need to consider. And so obviously AI will probably end up becoming a part of this conversation very, very quickly if it hasn't already gotten to that point, because technically you can use AI to do a lot of malicious tactics and techniques. Technically you can. There's a lot of safeguards that have been placed over these AI so that they don't do certain things, but if you're clever with it and if you have the mindset of a hacker, you can technically use an AI to do a lot of those crazy things. So that's where the OWASP Top 10 list gets updated, and that's one of the main reasons why it gets updated, and every 3 to 4 years seems to be about the time frame where they do their update. All right, this is the actual OWASP Top 10 website. So when you do OWASP Top 10 on Google, the very first link will bring you here. And this is what it looks like, right? So the one prior to the one that we're looking at right now was the 2017 version. And then you can see that injection went to third place instead of staying at first place. And then what happened was broken access control came up from fifth place and went into first place. And the most recent version per the OWASP Top 10 website at the time of this recording is the 2021 version. And then this is the full list right here. So you can actually click on each one of them and it'll take you into the overview, the description, and how to prevent it, example attack scenarios, etc. The version of it that we actually have over here is also the version that you saw in the 2021 list. So I'm just going to use this for the rest of the explanation right now, but you can just look at the OWASP Top 10 website at any point to try to get updated information for the list that you're looking at. And depending on when you actually watch this video and at what point you were studying for pen tests and things like that, the top 10 list may have already been updated, so it may not be the version that you're looking at on your screen right now. So the current version that we're looking at is technically 2021. It's not 2023. The broken access control would be unauthorized access to sensitive resources. Cryptographic failures would be anything that has to do with encryption or outdated encryption security certificates, known as TLS or SSL certificates. Injection attacks would be anything like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, command injection, remote code execution probably could actually even count as that. We have insecure design like poor threat modeling or weak authentication mechanisms, security misconfigurations like default passwords that were never changed, exposed admin panels that should not be public, that are public facing and people can actually get access to them, vulnerable and outdated components like unpatched software or outdated dependencies, identification and authentication failures like weak password policies or no multi-factor authentication, which is insane in these days. If you don't have MFA, it's kind of like you're really asking for it, especially if you combine that with a weak password policy. I mean, if you use a tool like John the Ripper, for example, which we're going to end up using when we get to the practical section, you'll see how easy it is to crack somebody's password, especially if it's a weak password policy. Like there are password lists, we call them dictionaries, right? They're like password dictionaries that have tens of millions of passwords in them. And you can use a tool like John the Ripper or Hydra to essentially kind of brute force somebody's password. And if there's no multi-factor authentication or if there's no secondary form of authentication in any way, then you're literally just asking to get hacked. So that's a big one. It's currently number 7 on the version of the list, but I feel like that's like one of those ones that can easily be manipulated very quickly. We have software and data integrity failures for malicious updates and insecure deserialization. Oof. Software and data integrity is something that happened, for example, to SolarWinds. So there's a playlist on this channel as well for Security Plus. And in Security Plus, we actually go through a lot of case studies for actual events that took place against real companies. And SolarWinds was a really big one because they have a lot of corporate clients, but they also had a lot of government clients that were using SolarWinds as their network scanning and network analytics, as well as type of detection tools. And SolarWinds has a very large suite of software, so they can do a lot of things. And what happened was one of their software updates was poisoned. It was essentially injected with malicious code, and it was considered a malicious update. And so every single one of the SolarWinds clients that updated their software got a malicious poisoned version of the software, and then that client ended up being at risk and they were hacked, and it was a big ordeal. SolarWinds went through a lot of headache and a lot of trouble because of the fact that they didn't verify the integrity of the source code of their software update. So a really, really big concept here as well. Security logging and monitoring failures, so lack of alerting for breaches or lack of logging for features. A lot of people, just to try to save space or processing power, they don't even have logging enabled. And finally, we have the server-side request forgery, which is essentially a request that's been made to the server that has been tampered with, and now that request that's being made is forged. Like the request being sent to the server is a forged request, and it exploits the web server to access internal resources. And if you don't sanitize the requests that are going to your server, there could be client-side request forgery as well. But client-side request forgery is usually saved by the actual client, meaning your web browser. For example, if you're using Firefox or Chrome, usually they do a pretty good job of making sure that certain things can't be executed through the client, but there's a way that you can actually submit that request to the server and bypass the client by using a tool like Burp Suite, for example. And Burp Suite is a really big deal when it comes down to web application penetration testing. And you use a tool like Burp Suite, and then you create some kind of a forged request that you can manually bypass through your client and actually send it to the server. And if you know what you're doing, then you can go ahead and get access to resources that you shouldn't have access to. And that's also a really big deal as well. If it wasn't, it wouldn't have made it to the top 10 list for OWASP. So why does OWASP matter? Why does the OWASP top 10 list matter? Because this is the industry standard for web application security testing. Every company that has a web application or does business through the web will most likely, if not definitely, be using the OWASP top 10 list as their framework, as their standard for everything that they do for the security of their web application. And if you're using, or if you're going to be doing some kind of a penetration test, it would be silly for you to not try to tackle these first. And then if you want to get creative and do other things, you can as well. But at the very least, you need to tackle this list of 10 different attack vectors that you would have access to, and then you can use against that web application. And this helps developers harden applications against common threats. So a lot of developers don't have necessarily a security background. So if you just give them this list and you say, hey, listen, these are the things that we really have to worry about for our web application, and the developer can look at this list, and based on the details of the list and what you saw on the website, because there's actually breakdowns that go deeper into each one of these pieces, based on those breakdowns, they can be like, oh, okay, so I need to make sure that this, and this are secure. X, Y, and Z has to be super secure. And then they can harden the application, which means they increase the security of the application and make it harder to hack into the application. OWASP also has the mobile security standard. So we have the Mobile Application Security Verification Standard, also known as MASVS or MASVS. This provides guidelines for securing mobile applications. And so this is not web application, was the one that we saw previously. And then we have the mobile application standard as well. So there's secure data storage, which is a key focus area, preventing data leakage on mobile devices, authentication and session management, ensuring that strong user authentication exists, and then network security, protecting apps from man-in-the-middle type attacks, which is essentially somebody sitting between your connection to the application, to the server that you're trying to connect to, and then they're sitting between you and that server, and then they're capturing all of the data that's being transferred back and forth. So let's say you're trying to transfer money. This is like a really common example. You're trying to transfer money from one bank account to another one, or you're trying to send money from your account to another person, and somebody's sitting in the middle of your communication between you and your bank application, and they see that request to transfer funds, and instead of sending it to account number 541, they will put their own account number, and then the money will actually go into their account, and you think that you sent it to 541 because on your end it looks exactly right and everything was fine, but they captured that request before it got to the bank server, and then they changed the information, and then all of a sudden they sent the money to their own bank account. So man-in-the-middle attacks are also a really big concern, because a lot of damage can be done if somebody can actually start intercepting and sniffing your traffic, and then going and modifying those packets and doing essentially whatever they want with the data that's being transferred back and forth. So these are the key focus areas for the Mobile Application Security Verification Standard. I'm sure you can already put together why this matters. So mobile penetration testing for iOS and Android and Google Pixel. I think Google Pixel probably still also runs on Android as well. This helps developers secure mobile applications against real-world threats. And just as kind of like a side note here, if you download an application, just download it directly from the Apple Store, the Apple App Store, or the Google Play Store, whatever it is. Like, download it directly from those stores, because in many cases, if not every case, Google and Apple and Samsung and whoever is running that app store has already safeguards in place to make sure that the applications that are being uploaded don't have malicious code inside of them, and they aren't weak or anything like that. So they have certain security standards that are required for a developer to be able to submit their application to their application store, so that it can be distributed to all of the customers for iOS, for example. Moving on to industrial control system security, and the Purdue model is very key, essential for that type of penetration test. And this is a layered security model for ICS, industrial control systems. It uses critical infrastructure, or ICS, industrial control systems, are used in critical infrastructure, such as power plants and factories and utilities. And it's a very, very, very important element. There was a video that I did for the Stuxnet worm that attacked the nuclear facilities for Iran's nuclear plant, their nuclear program. And they put the nuclear program of Iran back by, it was like estimated that like they put them back by at least like a dozen years, because they attacked their centrifuge plants where they were enriching the uranium for their nuclear bombs. And because of the fact that they were able to attack their industrial control systems, which is the type of systems that run nuclear power plants, are like a big piece of a nuclear power plant, they attacked those systems, and then they were able to mess with the centrifuges and their enrichment program, and they put them back by many, many years. So if you want the details of that story, that video is available, and you can just search Iran nuclear program or Stuxnet, and you'll be able to find that on the channel as well. Very, very interesting story. It was like a really crazy thing to actually be able to research for that video, and it was something that I found personally myself very interesting, because I was actually born in Iran, and when I got into cybersecurity, I found out that Iran is like a really big enemy of the United States for a lot of different reasons. And I mean, they're an enemy of a lot of other countries in the world as well. And they don't tell you that when you're actually living in Iran, because they make it seem like everybody else is the problem. And then you come outside and you're like, oh no, Iran was the problem. So anyways, yeah, industrial control systems are a very, very big deal, because a lot of really big types of plants or factories or utilities are used by a lot of different organizations and companies and countries, and this is considered to be critical infrastructure. So if you take one of those things down, then you're doing some serious damage to an entire city or a country, right? So this is why pen testing ICS, industrial control systems, is such an important topic. So the Purdue model has layers, like many other things. So level 0 to 1 is the sensors, actuators, and industrial controllers. Level 2 would be the process control system. Level 3 would be operational technology networks, also known as OT networks. And level 4 through 5 are IT systems and corporate networks. So as you go up the levels, it becomes broader, right? It expands to the overall network, or it, at each level gets closer to that overall network. As you stay at these base levels, this is the sensor itself that's inside of the plant that's sitting on the wall, right? And it's connected to all of the devices. And if you can somehow hack into the sensor and have the sensor display false information, then you are at the very ground level messing with the overall system. And then all of a sudden, that little sensor reading that's misinformed, or I would say it's been tampered with, and it's misinforming the engineer that's on duty, that sensor can now be the one little reason why that entire power plant can actually go up in smoke, so to speak. So the further up you go up these levels, you become broader and broader, and you go more into the actual controlling of the process, for example, or the operational technology network, right? The network of the technology, instead of just one system or instead of one little sensor. The reason why this matters is because it goes through supervisory access and data and the ICS networks. It helps secure those types of networks, and supervisory control has to do with these kind of remote controls that you're doing against these really massive infrastructures, because you're not necessarily on site, so you're controlling the location from a third or from a remote location. You're controlling the systems from a remote location. And it defines segmentation strategies to prevent cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. So how do you separate certain things from the rest of the system so that you don't impact the overall infrastructure and bring down the critical infrastructure, like a power grid that would be powering an entire city, and now the city doesn't have power, and now you can go ahead and attack the city or do whatever else you wanted to do against that city. So the Purdue model is a really, really important one, and industrial control systems are actually a very important set of systems because of the fact that they are specifically unique to the critical infrastructures of cities and countries. And now we can move on to threat modeling framework. So the DREAD model, also known as the Damage, Reproducibility, Exploitability, Affected User Discovery model. It's used to rank and prioritize vulnerabilities. So what is the potential to cause damage? How much damage can you actually inflict against the system or the infrastructure? How easy is it to reproduce this attack that we actually just executed? How easy is it to exploit the system that we are targeting? How many users are affected if we do this? So do I get to hack one user, or do I get to crash the system of one user, or can I crash the system of 1 million users, right? So the more users are affected, the the more critical this specific vulnerability is that needs to be addressed immediately. And then how easy is it to discover this, either by the attacker, how easy can they discover this vulnerability, or how easy is it for us to discover that we were just attacked by these people, and will this attack actually show up in our security tools to give us an alert that, hey, this is what's going on. So this is known as the DREAD model, and we also talk about this inside of the SOC Level 2 playlist through the threat modeling video. Inside of that same video, we have the STRIDE model for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. And this is used for application security threat modeling. So can you spoof? Can you spoof the identity of a user? Can you spoof an IP address? Can you spoof a MAC address, an email address? How easily can you spoof it so that you can go ahead and get in? The tampering that is done with the source code or with the data that's being transferred back and forth. Can we tamper with it? How easy is it to tamper with the web application, with the data that's being transferred in and out of that application? Is it possible to repudiate? And repudiation is basically you saying, I didn't do this, right? You saying I didn't do this, and then I don't have any logs to prove whether or not you did do it, so therefore you can technically repudiate. So what we want is non-repudiation. We want to make an environment or a web application that does not allow you to deny that you did such a thing. So if an email went out from your account, you can't say, oh, the email didn't go out from, I didn't send that email. It's like, well, look, I'm looking at these logs. It says that the email was sent from you, and then we're looking at your outbox in your email account, and it's saying that the email went out from your outbox. So if you didn't send it, then you got hacked and you did something to put yourself at risk, and now something is going on. So it's like you can't deny that this happened from your computer, right? You can't deny that you said this in a meeting, because we had 10 other people sitting in the meeting that are all witnesses that you said X, Y, and Z. So you cannot repudiate, right? So repudiation is, can it be denied? And then we would want to ultimately create some kind of a system and an environment that does not allow it. Sorry about the noise in that last section or that last part of that sentence. There was some schmuck that just drove down the street here, and I have my windows open because it's very hot. I'm recording in LA, by the way, so I was recording back and forth between Vegas and LA, and I'm recording in LA again. And the freaking neighborhood here, man, the people that go through this street is just, you really want to just punch their tires out. That's kind of like what I want to do. And like, it's always these cars that aren't even fancy cars that the guy just put a muffler on his car to make the car loud because he just wants to make himself feel more masculine or something. And it's like, bro, your car costs $1,000. Like, what are you even doing? Why are you drawing attention to yourself? Anyways, you can tell that I'm annoyed by the noise. I try to stop talking so that I can cut out the rest of the noise, but I think the last part of that sentence kind of caught some of that noise. So sorry about that. We also have information disclosure, which is a part of the STRIDE model. Information being disclosed. How easily is the information being disclosed? Is it actually being disclosed without us even knowing about it? So maybe something is happening where the information that we're trying to send to each other is actually being publicly distributed. Maybe we have a storage bucket on the Amazon cloud service, the S3 buckets, that are actually public facing, and we didn't hide the IP address, or we didn't block it from people who have to be logged in or something, and now there's public facing storage buckets that actually have a bunch of data in it, and it's easily accessible. It's being disclosed out into the world for anybody that can just access that link, and now we're in trouble. So information disclosure comes in a lot of different various ways as well. And then denial of service is a really common one. It's kind of an easy one to understand. If a service is available, so if the web application is available, that means that you are able to provide that service to your website visitors or to your customers. If your customers cannot access that service because I was able to crash your website, I now have inflicted a denial of service attack against your website, and the service is being denied to your legitimate customers. There's another version of this, which is a distributed denial of service. So if I flood your IP address, or if I flood your website from my own computer, and I send a million requests per second, I send a million pings per second to that IP address, it's me doing denial of service through one machine. If I do a distributed denial of service, that means I now have a access to a botnet, which is like 50,000 different IP addresses, and each one of those IP addresses is sending 1 million pings per second to your website, which is now going to crash your website. The reason why you would do a distributed denial of service is that your security appliance, your security tool will most likely detect that there's too many requests coming from one IP address, so it'll block that IP address immediately, so I can't really execute the rest of my DOS attack. But if I have a distributed denial of service, that means that your security tool now has to detect every single one of those 50,000 IP addresses that are sending requests to your web application, and it has to block every single one of those 50,000 IP addresses. So it becomes much more difficult to block a distributed denial of service, a DDoS, versus a regular DOS denial of service. And then finally, we have elevation of privilege. I get into your system and I can elevate my privileges to an administrator, and I can start creating new users, and I can start creating new services and do a lot of things that I should not be able to do because I am not an admin, and admins have too much privilege. So it's like you need to have different tiers of administrators inside of your company, so that if somebody does get admin privileges, they shouldn't be able to go ahead and create a brand new domain, for example. You know what I mean? It's like that should only be reserved for the domain administrator, and the domain administrator should have the highest level of security for their account, so that nobody can log in as that person and nobody can steal their credentials to elevate their privileges to that person's level. So this is the STRIDE model that's for application security and threat modeling. And then we have the OCTAVE model that focuses on risk assessments and mitigation and helps businesses define security priorities based on assets and threats. And we did an exercise in the incident response portion of SOC Level 2 recently. I think by the time that you see this video, there's probably going to be many other videos on SOC Level 2 that are going to come out, but you can just go ahead and find it. It's inside of the incident response series of videos for SOC Level 2, and you'll see incident response inside the titles. But essentially, we did this exercise where we were using an asset inventory, an inventory of all the assets, and then we were using a document. It's called the Spreadsheet of Doom. And inside of that Spreadsheet of Doom, you have a bunch of different indicators of compromise that show you that, you know, there's all these things that have happened inside of this incident that we have logged and we have documented. And there's all these things that could potentially happen in the future as well. And you just keep expanding your SOD, your Spreadsheet of Doom, and to make sure that, you know, all of the assets that are inside of your asset inventory are protected, and et cetera, et cetera. So the OCTAVE model is another version of something like that. What we did in that video was not the OCTAVE model, but it's very similar to what we actually did there. Just to give you a little bit more information on it, it stands for Operationally Critical Threat Asset and Vulnerable Evaluation. It's a risk-based framework used to assess and mitigate cybersecurity risks by focusing on organizational risks rather than solely technological ones. So it's looking at the overall organization and the operations of the organization. The focus is assessing organizational risk, considering how security incidents might impact business operations. It was developed by the Computer Emergency Response Team, also known as CERT, in the early 2000s. And it's a risk-based strategic assessment and planning method that involves a team of both technical specialists and managers. The key aspects would be operational risk, security practices, and technology. And there are several variations of it, including Octave S for organizations with extensive knowledge of their environment, Octave Allegro, which is simple and suitable for smaller teams, and of course Forte, which is highly adaptable. And the purpose is to help organizations identify, evaluate, and mitigate cybersecurity risk, focusing on the potential operational consequences of security incidents. We will be looking into this a little bit later. You're always more than welcome to, of course, do your own independent research, which I highly encourage that you do anyways. You should just be getting into the flow of doing your own independent research and just finding more information if you really want to be good inside of cybersecurity. And if you're studying for PenTest, that means you've been in cybersecurity for a while. So you should already have a very good understanding that you need to be doing a lot of independent research, and Google is your best friend. The various AI tools are your best friends, and you should be using them all the time to expand your knowledge and your skill set. Which now brings us to our practice questions for section 1.3. So we have multiple choice questions, which is essentially you get to choose one choice, and we have multiple response questions that will require that you choose 2 or more answers. and then there are the performance-based questions. Now, there are performance-based questions that are scenario-based, and then there's drag and drop stuff and matching questions. And the drag and drop matching question stuff is inside of the document that you're seeing in front of you right now. Inside of the spreadsheet that I'm about to go through, we're going to be covering scenario-based, performance-based questions. And these are things that are just very important, because I want you to understand that there's different types of questions for the actual PenTest Plus examination. And then there's even going to be questions where they're going to show you some code, right? And then they're going to say, what is this code doing? Or they're going to show you the results that came from a type of a report or a type of scan or something that were broken down. And they're like, okay, what is the results of this? How, when you look at this, what can you see, right? So that's going to be that type of performance-based question as well. So it's not just drag and drop or matching. There's actually going to be stuff that kind of fall under the practical portion or the lab portion of PenTest Plus, and we're going to be doing a lot of those as well. So you get very familiar with the tools and the inputs and the outputs of those tools and how they actually operate. But let's jump into the slideshow for section 1.3's practice questions. All right, here we go. First question is a multiple choice question. Which penetration testing methodology focuses on security auditing and operational security rather than just exploitation? We have MITRE ATT&CK, OWASP, OSSTMM, and then PTES. And so MITRE ATT&CK is this massive framework that has a lot to do with the adversaries and their tactics and techniques and procedures. OWASP is the web application security. OSS was the open source training manual, I believe. I forget the full acronym here. And then we also have PTES, which I also forget the acronym for. So let's see what the answer is. 3, 2, 1. And it is the open source manual for framework. You can refer back to the description of it to find out what that acronym stands for. I'm really not good at acronyms, but I have learned to pass these examinations. The key element is to know what is not the answer. And the open web application wasn't the answer. MITRE ATT&CK wasn't the answer. So it was really only with either C or D. And then, you know, if you've ever taken the SATs or anything like that, they'll tell you that the answer is always either B or C, right? So it's like, if you know for a fact it's not B, you can kind of deduce and you can conclude that, okay, it's probably C. I know it's not the best type of advice to give you, but I'm telling you, there's a part of the test process when you go through these tests that has to do with knowledge and everything, and then there's a part of it that's like, okay, if you're gonna guess, what is your best guess? How can you pick your best guess? Anyways, which of the following penetration, so multiple response question here, we have select 2 answers. Which of the following pen testing methodologies emphasize structured assessment and ethical security testing? So PTES Penetration Testing Execution Standard. CREST is the Council of Registered Ethical Security Standards. So we're talking about ethical security. So for sure, B is going to be in there. OWASP Top 10 has to do with web application security. There really isn't much of ethical security testing unless they're saying like one of them is structured assessment and the other one is ethical security. But I feel like they're saying that both of them have to do with ethical security. And then we have the mobile standards as well. So if I was going to choose anything, I would say it's A and B, because C and D have to do with web applications and mobile applications. So we would say A and B. Very good. What is the primary purpose of the MITRE ATT&CK framework? To document common vulnerabilities found in web applications? That would be no. Provide a structured methodology for pen testing? Could be. Classify and map adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures? That's definitely the answer. To outline compliance requirements? No. So C would be the answer for MITRE ATT&CK. Which of the following OWASP Top 10 categories refers to improper input validation that allows attackers to execute unintended commands? So we're talking about sanitized input and improper input application or validation, right? So broken access control has to do with the authorization that a user has. Injection definitely has to do with something that's being input into something, right? So the input is not being validated, therefore they can inject something like SQL injection or cross-site scripting, something like that. Vulnerable outdated components has to do with updating and patching. Server-side request forgery can technically be input validation, but there isn't much of a hint that's telling us that it has to do with the server. So the answer, in my opinion, would be B. There we go. Which of the following best describe the purpose of the OWASP top 10 list? And we have 2 answers here. So to provide a list of the most critical web application security risks, sounds pretty good. To guide developers and security professionals in mitigating vulnerabilities, that's pretty good. To replace regulatory security standards, no, it's not replacing anything like PCI, the payment card industry. That's definitely not replacing that at all. To define compliance requirements for pen testing, that's also not the case because it's not defining compliance requirements for anything. Although adhering to the OWASP top 10 will most likely make sure that you are compliant, but it's not defining compliance requirements. So A and B would be my answer. Very good. Which framework is specifically designed for assessing the security of mobile applications? So MITRE attack was the attack map, right? It has tactics, techniques, procedures. PTES was, again, I forgot what it was, penetration test something. MASVS is mobile application security, so that's definitely the one. OWASP top 10 is for web application security. So we will do C, MASVS. Very good. Which model is commonly used to secure industrial control systems, ICS, by defining security layers? So this one, I just know that Purdue is the one that's connected to ICS. That was like a visual connection that I made to it. Open source security, technically it does apply to everything, but there was nothing that outlined or that it said that it applies to industrial control systems. They said, physical systems, humans, things like that, but there was nothing that had to do with the industrial control systems. And STRIDE is actually a threat modeling framework. So if we're talking about specifically ICS, industrial control systems, we're talking about the Purdue model. Very good. Multiple choice here. Which threat modeling framework evaluates threats based on damage, reproducibility, exploitability, affected users, and discoverability? So we have the DREAD. So that would be DREAD. And there it is. Which of the following are components of the STRIDE threat model? And you know what? Let's actually go back. So in the exam, most likely you're not going to get a question like this. Okay, so just giving you a heads up here. I can't even share with you the direct questions that are coming from the exam because there's an NDA that's signed and there's a lot of rules and regulations and laws, and you can get your license taken away from you. So we can't share it with you, the actual questions. But what we're trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is share with you something that will at least get your mind working, get your brain working towards the type of the question that you would ask. So, or the type of questions you would be asked, and then how to kind of deduce, how to narrow down what the response would be. So the DREAD framework, the DREAD threat modeling framework, number one, you see in the question that it gives you threat modeling framework is the one that you're looking at. MITRE attack is not a threat modeling framework, so that's immediately not the answer. OCTAVE and STRIDE are threat modeling frameworks, and then DREAD is a threat modeling framework. Now what's going on is that DREAD is actually looking at damage that can be done. Can that attack be reproduced? Can the exploitability, is it an easily exploitable system? How many users are affected, and how easy is it for them to discover us or for us to discover them? So if you see something that says, yeah, we want a threat modeling framework to look at the number of affected users, or we want a threat modeling framework to look at how reproducible a specific attack is, you can narrow down by understanding, okay, DREAD stands for damage, you know what I mean? So it's like, if you know what these things stand for, then you'll be able to understand that, okay, they're talking about this specific model, so this can connect to be the answer, right? So that's kind of the way that I would approach preparing for the questions and things like that. Pay attention to certain keywords inside of the question, and then it'll tell you what you need to focus on, what type of answer you need to focus on, and then from there you can hopefully find the right answer. Which of the following are components of the STRIDE threat model? So we want 2, right? So spoofing, spoofing, tampering, repudiation, right? Integrity, I think it was, and the last 2 I forget. So spoofing, I think, is one of them. Elevation of privilege is probably the E at the very end right here. Data exfiltration could be D right there. And network enumeration is definitely not the answer because it's not even in here. So spoofing, elevation of privilege, data exfiltration would be the 3 responses that we would look at. I would say spoofing is definitely one of them, and I would say data exfiltration would be the other one as well. So let's see if it's A and C. It's actually A and B. So it's spoofing and it's elevation of privilege. So data exfiltration is probably, I thought it was in there, honestly. Maybe I'm thinking about something else. But okay, there we go. So we have spoofing, elevation of privilege. There we go. Oh, and that's it. That's actually all of the practice questions that we had for 1.3. So all of these practice questions are available to Hackaholics Anonymous agents and above. So the entire slideshow is available. And of course, the document that we use for the presentation itself is going to be available, and everything that we create as far as the source code or any kind of code automation for the pen testing exercises that we go through. All of those things is going to be available for Hackaholics Anonymous agents and up. So if you want to join, I would recommend that you check it out, and you're about to get a quick little message that will tell you a little bit more about Hackaholics Anonymous. But as far as everything else for this section is concerned, we're officially wrapped with 1.3, and in the next video, we're going to go into section 1.4, which is the penetration test reporting. And that will most likely come out next week, because I'm trying to kind of space these out week by week. So you'll get it next week on Friday. If not, it might come in earlier because I feel generous. So we'll see how it goes. But at the very, very least, most likely you're going to receive it next Friday. So hopefully you had a good one. Hopefully you learned from this specific video, and I will see you in the next one. To get the PenTest Plus notes, practice questions, and to join a supportive community of like-minded people like you, consider joining the Hackaholics Anonymous membership community. We have 4 tiers: the supporter, the agent, the guardian, and the master. And each tier gets their own Discord server and early access to content. The agent, guardian, and master levels will get exclusive content like line-by-line code explanations for how to create cybersecurity and PenTest Plus scripts, like exclusive downloads that they will get. For example, the notes document for this PenTest Plus and everything that I'm using for the lectures, as well as all of the practice questions and everything else that will go along that will be made for the scripts and everything else that we're going to be doing for the PenTest Plus training series. There will be free pre-made monthly Python automations that have to do with system administration, cybersecurity defense, as well as, of course, PenTest Plus and ethical hacking. And then there's going to be monthly live streams with me every single month, plus so many other things that you would get as a part of being a member of Hackaholics Anonymous in these tiers. To join, you can simply click the link in the description below, or you can go to our homepage and click the join button there, or you can go to youtube.com/@hankhackshackers/join, and you'll be able to join Hackaholics Anonymous.